I never imagined that a trip to Miami Beach, something I had meticulously planned and paid for, would turn into one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. This was supposed to be a special vacation for my wife Julie, 43F, her parents, and me. But 2 days in, and I was already wondering why I bothered. The reason? My sister-in-law Carla, 37F. Julie and I have been married for 11 years. We both worked hard to build our careers, and we enjoy the kind of life that reflects that effort. No kids, just travel and shared adventures. Every year, we take at least 3 big vacations, plus shorter getaways to break up the routine. A couple of years ago, we decided to include Julie's parents, Henry, 75M, and Marianne, 71F, on one of these trips because Henry's health was getting worse, and we wanted to give them experiences while we still could. This year, Miami was the destination. It wasn't just a random choice. Henry and Marianne honeymooned there 48 years ago. When Henry mentioned he'd love to go back one last time, there was a quiet urgency in his voice. It was the kind of wish I couldn't ignore, and there was no way I was letting them cover the costs. They've treated me like family since day one, and I wanted to do this for them. Everything was set. I covered the flights, hotel, dinners, and excursions. Then Carla, Julie's younger sister, asked if she could join us. Unlike us, Carla isn't well off. She has 3 kids, and her husband's salary barely keeps their household afloat. She hasn't had a real vacation since her own honeymoon, and I guess our Instagram travel photos wore on her. She asked to come along, knowing full well that I'd have to foot her bill. I didn't mind. Family is family, right? That was my first mistake. The vibe shifted the second we landed in Miami. After we checked into the resort, Carla suggested a family photo with the ocean view. I was excited, reaching for my phone to set a timer so we could all be in the picture, but Carla stopped me with a smile. "Oh, can you take the picture for us? We want just the 4 of us. Mom, Dad, Julie, and me." It was like a slap in the face. I figured maybe she just wanted one photo of their original family, so I let it go. But that was just the beginning. At every stop, every restaurant, every moment that should have been about making memories together, Carla found a way to exclude me. "Oh, just the 4 of us," she'd chirp. Or, "This one's just for family." And I was stuck behind the camera, watching them smile while I became the designated photographer. It didn't stop there. Carla plastered those photos all over social media, creating a narrative that conveniently left me out of everything. I was paying for a family vacation where I apparently didn't exist. Julie tried to step in sometimes, reminding Carla that I was family too. Her parents invited me into the photos whenever they noticed, but Carla had a knack for twisting situations, smoothly pushing me out again. It felt like I was nothing more than an ATM and a personal photographer for their perfect reunion. One afternoon, after a long day of sightseeing, I was eager to relax by the pool, the turquoise water reflecting the Miami sun. As I was about to get in, Carla struck again. "Hey, can you hang back for a second? We want a girls' photo, just Julie, Mom, and me." That second turned into an hour. First, it was a shot of the 3 women, then one of just the sisters, then an original family photo. I stood by the pool, feeling like a ghost. I couldn't understand why she even came if my presence was such a problem. The next day, her exclusion tactics got worse. We went on a boat ride along the coast. The boat had 2 rows of 2 seats, perfect for 4 people, but we were 5. Before anyone could suggest a fair rotation, Carla jumped in. "Mom and Dad can sit together, and I'll sit next to Julie. It'll be perfect for photos." That left me to take the next boat, alone and sandwiched between strangers. When we docked, Carla happily bought a souvenir photo, her, Julie, and their parents smiling together, while I awkwardly floated in the background of my own vacation. Dinner at a top-tier seafood restaurant. Same story. I'd spent weeks getting a reservation with a perfect sunset view. But Carla, the last-minute addition, grabbed the seat next to Julie. Her parents took the prime view seats, and I ended up stuck by the server station, my back to the ocean I'd planned to enjoy with my wife. When I finally tried to join their conversations, Carla steered them toward childhood memories and inside jokes, shutting me out again. No matter what I said or did, I was on the outside looking in. I thought things would get better on spa day. I'd arranged luxurious treatments, one suite for Julie and me, one for her parents, and a solo one for Carla. But when Henry wasn't feeling up to it, Carla pounced. "Maybe you should stay with Dad. We need a girls' day." It was exhausting, but sitting with Henry on the beach turned out to be the highlight of the trip. We had a real conversation, no games, no manipulation. He shared stories and wisdom, and for once I felt seen. That evening, I finally talked to Julie about it in our hotel room. She understood why I was hurt, but she tried to justify Carla's behavior. "She's just trying to relive memories from our childhood," she said. Their father's deployments had left gaps in their family time, and Carla was clinging to something she missed. I started to wonder if I was overreacting. Was it wrong to feel excluded just because I was footing the bill? That self-doubt stung almost as much as Carla's behavior. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being used, and I was done being the ghost in my own vacation. After that conversation with Julie, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Carla's behavior really wasn't intentional. Maybe she was just caught up in the nostalgia of reliving family memories. But as the days went on, those excuses stopped holding any weight. The morning after our talk, I woke up early and went out to the balcony. The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting golden light over the ocean. I sipped my coffee and tried to clear my mind, but all I felt was frustration. This trip was meant to be a special gift for Julie's parents, a chance to relive their honeymoon memories. Instead, it felt like Carla was determined to rewrite those memories, with me erased from the picture. When Julie and her parents joined me for breakfast, things felt normal, almost peaceful. Henry and Marianne chatted about how much they loved the boat ride, despite the hiccup with seating. I felt a flicker of hope that maybe today would be different, but that hope didn't last long. Carla sauntered into the breakfast area, a wide smile plastered across her face. "Good morning, family," she chirped, her eyes sliding right past me. It was like I wasn't even there. She leaned in close to Julie and whispered something that made her laugh, and suddenly I felt that familiar wall go up again. Whatever chance we had at a peaceful day evaporated in that instant. We had plans to explore some art galleries and museums that day. I love art. I always have, and I was looking forward to sharing that experience with everyone. But once we got there, it was more of the same. Carla took charge, pulling Julie and her parents through the exhibits while I trailed behind like a forgotten afterthought. Every now and then, Julie would glance back and give me a soft smile or a little wave, but she never pulled away from Carla's orbit. At one point, I spotted a beautiful piece, a vibrant painting of the Miami coastline, full of color and life. I wanted to share it with Julie, to have a moment that was just ours. But as I reached out to get her attention, Carla swooped in. "Julie, come look at this one. Remember how we used to paint together as kids?" Julie hesitated, glancing between me and Carla. I could see the conflict in her eyes, but in the end, she let Carla drag her away. I stood there, feeling like someone had punched me in the gut. No matter what I did, Carla always found a way to wedge herself between us. By the time we left the galleries, I was drained. I thought maybe lunch would give me a chance to reset, to have a moment where I could just enjoy my wife's company. But even that turned into another exercise in exclusion. We found a cute cafe with outdoor seating and settled at a table. The breeze was warm, the smell of fresh bread and salt water in the air. It should have been perfect. But Carla was in fine form, dominating the conversation with stories from their childhood. Every sentence was another reminder that I wasn't part of those memories. "Remember when we used to come here with Mom and Dad?" she said, laughing. "Those were the days." I tried to contribute, to steer the conversation toward something we could all talk about. "This place has such a nice vibe. Maybe we could come back here for dinner one night." Carla barely acknowledged me. "Julie, do you think they still make those giant sundaes we used to get?" It was like talking to a brick wall. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of exclusion and polite smiles. By the time we got back to the hotel, I was done. I felt like I was losing my mind, trapped in a vacation that was supposed to be about togetherness, but had turned into a bizarre exercise in being invisible. That night after dinner, I finally decided to take a walk by myself. The resort grounds were quiet, lit by soft lights that reflected off the pool and the ocean beyond. I wandered aimlessly, trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong. When I got back to the room, Julie was sitting on the bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I came in, her eyes soft with worry. "Hey," she said quietly. "You okay?" I let out a long breath. "Honestly, no, I'm not okay." She nodded, setting her phone aside. "I know, I see what's happening, and I hate it." "Then why are you letting it happen?" My voice cracked with the weight of all the hurt I'd been holding in. "Why are you letting her push me out like this?" Julie's eyes filled with tears. "Because if I confront her, it'll ruin everything. My parents have been waiting for this trip for so long. I don't want to cause a scene, not now." I understood what she meant, but it didn't make it any easier to accept. I felt like I was being sacrificed for the sake of keeping the peace. And honestly, I was tired of it. We went to bed that night without saying much else. Julie curled up next to me, but there was a distance between us that hadn't been there before. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Something had to change, and I was done waiting for it to happen on its own. The next morning, I woke up early again, the frustration from the night before still weighing on me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Julie slept peacefully beside me. I loved her. I really did. But I couldn't keep letting myself be pushed aside like this. There was only so much keeping the peace a person could take before it started to feel like a betrayal. By the time breakfast rolled around, I'd made up my mind to at least try and enjoy the day on my own terms. If Carla wanted to act like I wasn't there, then maybe I'd stop trying to be part of whatever warped family trip she was engineering. As soon as we sat down for breakfast, Carla wasted no time starting up the same old routine. "Hey, Julie," she said, her voice all sugary sweetness. "How about we go check out that boutique we saw yesterday? Mom would love it." Julie glanced at me, and for a moment I thought she'd push back. But then she sighed and nodded. "Sure, sounds good." Carla didn't even look my way. "Great, just us girls." Something in me snapped. I leaned back in my chair, forcing a smile. "You know what? That sounds perfect. I'll take the morning to do my own thing." Julie's eyes flickered with worry, but she didn't say anything. Carla, on the other hand, gave a bright smile, as if I'd finally learned my place. After breakfast, they headed off, leaving me with the whole day to myself. At first, I felt a little lost. I hadn't come to Miami to explore the city alone, but the more I thought about it, the more determined I became. If Carla wanted to exclude me, then fine. I'd make my own memories. I spent the morning walking along the beach, letting the sound of the waves wash away my frustration. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and for the first time since we arrived, I felt a sense of peace. I wandered through some local markets, stopped for coffee at a quiet cafe, and even took a spontaneous surfing lesson. It wasn't what I'd planned, but it felt good to reclaim a little joy for myself. When I got back to the resort in the early afternoon, I spotted Henry sitting by the pool, a newspaper in his lap. He looked up and smiled when he saw me. "Hey there, son," he said. "Have a good morning?" "Yeah, actually, I did." I sat down next to him, and for a while we just enjoyed the quiet. After a few minutes, he folded his newspaper and looked at me thoughtfully. "I've noticed Carla's been difficult," he said carefully. "You don't deserve that. And I want you to know, Marianne and I see it. We see you." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you. That means a lot." He nodded, his expression somber. "You've done a lot for this family, more than Carla seems to realize." Hearing those words lifted some of the weight off my chest. At least someone saw what was happening. Someone understood. Later that afternoon, the girls came back from their shopping trip, bags in hand and smiles on their faces. Julie looked happy, but there was a flicker of guilt in her eyes when she saw me. Carla, of course, acted like I wasn't even there. "Hey," Julie said softly. "How was your day?" "It was good," I replied. "Really good, actually." She nodded, as if she wasn't sure how to respond. Before she could say more, Carla clapped her hands together. "Who's ready for the boat ride this afternoon?" She chirped, the boat ride. I'd almost forgotten. We'd planned a sunset cruise along the coast, something I'd booked weeks ago, imagining it would be a chance for all of us to enjoy the ocean together. But I already knew how this was going to go. Sure enough, as we boarded the boat, Carla took control. "Mom and Dad, you sit here," she said, pointing to the front row. Then she turned to Julie. "You and I can sit together right behind them." She didn't even hesitate, didn't even glance in my direction. I clenched my jaw and took a deep breath. This was getting ridiculous. Julie looked back at me, her eyes filled with apology, but she didn't say anything. Fine. If they wanted to play their little game, so be it. I settled into a seat on the next boat, wedged between two strangers. As we pulled away from the dock, I watched Carla laughing with Julie and her parents, snapping photos like they were the happiest family in the world. But this time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt something else, a quiet resolve. I was done being ignored, done being the invisible bankroller for Carla's fantasy vacation. Something had to give, and I was no longer afraid of being the one to break the illusion. When the boat ride ended, Carla waved her phone in the air, grinning. "These photos turned out perfectly," she announced. I didn't even bother responding. Julie glanced at me, worry etched into her face, but I just gave her a small smile. I had my own plans now, and I wasn't going to let Carla's antics ruin another minute of this trip. That evening, as we prepared for dinner at a fancy seafood restaurant, another reservation I'd spent weeks securing, I felt a calm determination settle over me. Carla had pushed me too far, and it was time she understood that actions have consequences. We headed to the restaurant, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink as the sun set. I let Carla walk ahead, her voice a constant stream of chatter. But this time, I wasn't going to let her take the moment away from me. When we reached the table, Carla made her usual move, sliding into the seat next to Julie and grabbing one of the prime view spots. But before anyone could settle in, I cleared my throat. "Actually," I said, my voice firm but even, "Julie and I are going to sit together this time." Everyone froze. Carla's eyes widened, surprise and irritation flashing across her face. But I didn't give her a chance to argue. I gently guided Julie to the seat next to mine, facing the stunning ocean view. Henry and Marianne exchanged a glance, small smiles playing at their lips. They knew. And for the first time on this trip, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Carla scowled but didn't say a word. The balance had shifted, and she knew it. Dinner went on, the conversation finally flowing in a way that felt natural. And for once, I felt like I belonged. For the first time since we'd arrived, dinner felt right. As I sat next to Julie, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a sense of calm finally washed over me. The conversation at the table felt lighter, more genuine. Henry and Marianne smiled, occasionally sharing glances that spoke volumes. They'd noticed the shift. Carla, on the other hand, was unusually quiet. Her smile was tight, her eyes flickering between Julie and me. I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head, trying to figure out how her carefully controlled narrative was slipping away. She picked at her food, forcing out the occasional comment about the view or the meal, but her usual domineering presence was gone. It felt like a small victory. But I knew Carla, and I knew this wasn't over. After dinner, we decided to stroll along the beach. The moon was rising, casting a silver glow over the waves. Julie slipped her hand into mine as we walked, the familiar warmth of her touch easing some of the tension in my chest. "I'm glad we sat together tonight," she whispered. "Me too," I said softly. It felt normal. She squeezed my hand, but before we could say more, Carla's voice broke through the moment. "Julie, come look at this. It's just like that time when we were kids." Her voice carried that same insistence, the same demand for attention. Julie hesitated, torn between me and the pull of her sister's voice. I saw the guilt in her eyes, the same guilt that had been weighing her down since we arrived. "It's okay," I said, forcing a smile. "Go ahead." Julie let out a small sigh and nodded, slipping away to join Carla. I watched them walk off, Carla's voice rising above the sound of the waves, telling some story from their childhood. The moment of peace was gone, replaced by the all-too-familiar feeling of being on the outside looking in. I stayed back, staring out at the ocean, the waves endlessly rolling toward the shore. I let the sound fill my ears, trying to drown out the frustration building inside me. But no matter how much I tried to push it down, I couldn't shake the feeling that this had gone too far. I was done being the outsider, done being the one who kept quiet for the sake of peace. This was supposed to be a family vacation, but it felt like Carla was determined to carve me out of the picture entirely. When we got back to the hotel, I decided I needed to talk to Julie. Really talk. Not just about the hurt I was feeling, but about what we were going to do about it. As soon as we were alone in our room, I turned to her. "Julie," I said, my voice steady, "we need to talk." She looked up at me, her eyes weary but attentive. "I know." I took a deep breath. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine while Carla pushes me out over and over again. This isn't fair to me, and honestly, it isn't fair to you either." She sat down on the edge of the bed, her shoulders slumping. "I know. I see what she's doing, and it hurts me too. But she's my sister. I keep hoping she'll realize how awful she's being, but she just doesn't stop." I sat next to her, taking her hand in mine. "I get that she's your sister, and I know you love her. But there's a line, Julie, and she's crossed it. This trip is supposed to be about family, and she's made it clear she doesn't see me as part of that." Julie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how to fix this. Maybe it's not about fixing it," I said quietly. "Maybe it's about standing up for what's right. For us." She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes. "You're right. I'm tired of letting her ruin things. I didn't want to cause drama in front of my parents." "I understand," I said. "But at some point, protecting the peace stops being peaceful. It's just avoiding the inevitable." We sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Finally, Julie took a deep breath and looked at me. "I'll talk to her," she said firmly. "I'm not going to let her keep doing this." Relief flooded through me, but I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Carla wasn't the type to back down gracefully. The next morning, as we packed up for the final day of the trip, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Carla's chirpy voice was nowhere to be found. She seemed to sense that something was different. When we met in the lobby, she shot me a look, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she knew her control was slipping. Julie didn't give her a chance to play her games. "Carla," she said, her voice calm but firm, "we need to talk." Carla blinked, feigning confusion. "About what?" "About this whole trip," Julie continued. "About how you've treated my husband like he doesn't exist. It's not okay, it's not fair, and I'm done letting it slide." Carla's face flushed red. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Julie shot back. "Every time you said, 'just the four of us,' every time you made him take the pictures instead of being in them, every time you shut him out, it was intentional. And I won't let you keep pretending it wasn't." For a second, Carla was speechless. Then she crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with anger. "I was just trying to make memories with my family." "He is family," Julie said, her voice shaking. "And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the one who doesn't belong in these memories." Carla's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, she didn't have a comeback. I stood there quietly, letting Julie take the lead. This was her sister, her fight, and watching her stand up for us, for me, filled me with a mix of pride and relief. Henry and Marianne stood off to the side, watching the scene unfold. I saw the sadness in their eyes, the weight of seeing their daughters at odds, but there was also something else, a quiet understanding that this confrontation had been a long time coming. Finally, Carla let out a bitter laugh. "Fine, if that's how you feel, I'll just go." She spun on her heel and walked away, her shoulders stiff with anger. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was a different kind of heavy. A cleansing one, like the air right after a storm. Julie turned to me, her eyes searching mine. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I wrapped her in my arms. "You stood up. That's what matters." We didn't know what the fallout would be, but for now, it didn't matter. For the first time on the trip, I felt like we were finally on solid ground. After Carla stormed off, there was a strange silence hanging in the air. It felt like we had finally broken through the fog of unspoken tensions, but the aftermath was heavy. Henry and Marianne watched quietly, their faces drawn with worry and resignation. Julie still clung to my hand, her grip tight, as if anchoring herself to the reality of what had just happened. Marianne let out a long sigh and shook her head. "I wish it hadn't come to this," she murmured, her voice soft. But something had to give. Henry nodded, his eyes tired but resolute. Sometimes facing the truth is the only way forward. We walked to the car together, the four of us moving with a quiet understanding. Carla was nowhere to be seen. As we packed our luggage and settled in for the ride to the airport, I felt a sense of calm that had been missing this entire trip. There was no more pretending, no more biting my tongue. The truth was out there, raw and real. The drive to the airport was peaceful, though tinged with sadness. Henry and Marianne sat in the back, occasionally exchanging soft words or glancing out the window. Julie rested her head on my shoulder, and I felt her exhale, like she was finally releasing all the tension she'd been holding in. When we arrived at the terminal, we found Carla standing near the entrance, her arms crossed over her chest, a defiant look on her face. But the fire in her eyes had dimmed. Maybe she realized there was no more room for her games. She didn't say a word as we walked up, and none of us made an effort to break the silence. Finally, Julie turned to her, her voice steady but kind. "Carla, we're going to check in. You can come with us, or you can figure it out on your own. But this has to stop." Carla's jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought she was going to snap back. But she just nodded stiffly and fell in line behind us. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest we were going to get. At the check-in counter, I handed over our boarding passes. When the agent confirmed our upgrades to business class, Carla's eyes widened slightly. I didn't say anything, just let the truth of the situation settle in. She was going to experience the flight back in economy while we enjoyed the comfort I had planned for us. Julie looked at me, her eyes full of gratitude. "You did the right thing," she whispered. I nodded. "Sometimes people need to feel the consequences of their actions." We boarded the plane, and as we settled into our spacious seats, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. This wasn't about being petty or cruel. It was about setting boundaries and refusing to be disrespected. Carla had taken advantage of my generosity, and now she was learning the hard way that there are limits to what people will tolerate. As the flight took off, I leaned back in my seat, the hum of the engines a soothing backdrop. Julie took my hand, and we shared a quiet moment of peace. For the first time in days, I felt like we were in this together, a united front. When we landed, Carla rushed off the plane without so much as a glance in our direction. Her husband was waiting for her at baggage claim, his face a mixture of confusion and frustration. I watched as she tried to explain herself, her voice rising and falling in strained tones. He didn't look convinced. We said our goodbyes to Henry and Marianne, their hugs lingering longer than usual. Henry clasped my shoulder, his eyes sincere. "Thank you for everything, and I'm sorry for the way things went." "No need to apologize," I said. "I'm just glad you two got to enjoy the trip." Marianne hugged me tightly. "You're family no matter what. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Her words settled deep in my heart, reinforcing what I knew to be true. Julie and I walked to our car, the cool air of the evening wrapping around us. As we drove home, the silence between us was comfortable. Julie finally broke it. "I know this trip didn't go the way we planned," she said softly, "but I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." I smiled, glancing over at her. I'm proud of us for getting through it. The days that followed were quieter. We settled back into our routines, the weight of the trip slowly fading. Carla didn't reach out, and neither did we. It wasn't out of anger, just a mutual understanding that space was necessary. A week later, Julie's mom called. Her voice was warm, but tinged with sadness. "Carla's facing some tough times with her husband," she said. "He's not happy about what happened on the trip." I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that. just a sense of inevitability. Carla's choices had led her here. It wasn't my job to fix it. Julie and I talked about it that night, the glow of the setting sun filling our living room. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "No, sometimes people need to learn the hard way. I hope she does." Julie nodded, leaning into me. "Me too." Thanksgiving came around, and the family gathered without Carla and her husband. The atmosphere was different, quieter, more reflective. But there was peace. Henry shared stories, Marianne laughed, and Julie and I felt like we truly belonged. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about respect, knowing your worth, and standing by the people who see it too. And as I sat there, surrounded by the warmth of family, I knew that was more than enough.